On our way to a friend's wedding, my girlfriend stared out the window and whispered, "You deserve someone who's actually honest." What she did next turned the weekend into a disaster. The sun was dipping low as we pulled into the wedding venue's parking lot. I glanced over at Jessica, who had been oddly quiet since that whispered comment in the car. The chatter of arriving guests felt distant, like I was watching from underwater. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. Something was off, but I didn't know what yet. Jessica stepped out of the car and smoothed her dress as if calming herself for a performance. I followed, adjusting my jacket collar and trying to shake off the growing unease. The gravel under our feet crunched sharply, echoing her earlier words in my mind. "You deserve someone who's actually honest. Why now? Why here?" Every laugh and greeting from fellow guests felt like a signal flare, marking us as outsiders in our own weekend. We walked toward the reception tent, draped in fairy lights and white ribbons, but the festive decorations seemed to mock me. I half expected to find a neon sign flashing our failure. Jessica forced a smile when she greeted Mrs. Reynolds, the bride's mother, complimenting the floral arrangements. Her voice hit an odd note, too bright to be sincere. The moment passed, but the dissonance lingered. I scanned the perimeter and saw Jake talking quietly with a groomsman. They both jumped slightly when they realized I'd noticed. Jake gave me a brief nod that didn't reach his eyes, and whatever he whispered to the other man was muffled. I stepped closer, catching a fragment. "It can't wait. Not here." My heart thudded. This was more than awkward tension. It was a secret unfolding live. We moved inside to find our table. The grand entrance song played, and everyone cheered. I sat down beside Jessica, taking in the centerpieces of pastel roses and candles that flickered in the early evening breeze. Jessica tucked her hair behind her ear, her fingertips brushing my arm with a subtle tremor. I touched her hand and asked if she was okay. She nodded, eyes fixed on the ceremony that had already begun. Her silence spoke louder than any protest, but I still wasn't sure what to ask. Across the table, Alyssa winked at me, then leaned in. "Excited to see you two on the dance floor later," she whispered, oblivious to the storm brewing. I managed a half-smile, but my mind raced. Alyssa's cheer felt like a betrayal itself, as if she hadn't noticed the undercurrent or chose to ignore it. In that moment, I realized our friends might already be divided, some locked into ignorance, others complicit in silence. The waiter brought champagne, and Jessica raised her glass to toast the couple. She glanced at me, her eyes distant. I followed her gaze and saw Jake slip a phone under the tablecloth. The phone vibrated, and Jessica's shoulder jerked. He said something low and urgent in her ear. She closed her eyes for a beat and let out a slow breath. When she opened them, I could see the flicker of panic before she regained composure. I took a sip of champagne, trying to steady my own breathing while pretending this was all normal. Later, a soft breeze carried laughter across the garden. I drifted toward the bar to clear my head. The bartender handed me a whiskey on the rocks with no questions asked. I cradled the glass, watching the ice clink against the tumbler walls. Every sip felt like savoring my own doubts. Jessica appeared beside me, offering a shy apology for her earlier silence. I brushed it off, saying I just wanted to enjoy the night. That night was unraveling too quickly for comfort. From the corner of my eye, I caught Jake slipping away through a gap in the tents. He paused when he saw me looking, then ducked out of sight. My stomach flipped. I finished my drink in 2 swallows, setting the glass down with a definitive clink. I couldn't stay idle while fragments of their secret played out. I needed to know more but had to choose my moment carefully. Confrontations under tulle and ribbons rarely ended well. Returning to our table, I found Jessica staring at her phone's locked screen. It glowed with a new message preview, a name I didn't recognize and the words, "Tonight, we meet." Her lips parted, her eyes wide for an instant before she locked the screen and slid the phone into her clutch. I felt the blood drain from my face. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter, and I realized there was no easy way out of this weekend. I sat down across from her and braced myself. The voices around us melted into background noise. My pulse hammered as I prepared to ask the question that would start everything. Who and why? But the words caught in my throat. Instead of asking, I simply reached out and rested my hand on her wrist. She looked up, guilt and fear warring in her eyes. In that silent moment, I understood this weekend wasn't about a wedding. It was about secrets, betrayal, and deciding how far I was willing to go before everything collapsed around me. I sat silent, hand on her wrist as lanterns swayed above, shadows dancing across the table. Every familiar smile felt like a lie. Soon I'd choose. Expose everything now or wait. Either choice would change me forever. Truly forever. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. But beneath the surface, alliances were shifting like tectonic plates. I watched Jessica from across the room as she laughed at a joke I couldn't hear, her eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. Her smile was too polished, like she'd practiced it in front of the mirror. Jake hovered near the edge of the dance floor, circling like a shark in shallow water. Always close, never fully committing. The tension between them was palpable, and with every passing minute, I felt pulled deeper into a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. I slipped away from the crowd under the pretense of checking my phone, but my real goal was to revisit the messages I'd seen earlier. Fragments of dates and locations that didn't match any of our plans. Once outside, I ducked into a quiet corner by the coat check and unlocked Jessica's phone from memory. The screen lit up with a string of texts to an unknown number. See you tomorrow. And then, a few hours later, don't tell him anything. The timestamp spanned weeks, Thursdays, Saturdays, and even a random Tuesday afternoon. I scrolled up, scanning the dates against our calendar. Every entry corresponded to a day she'd claimed to have work meetings or girls' nights. My breath caught as the pattern emerged. She wasn't just hiding a fling. She was concealing a premeditated plan. I pocketed the phone and forced myself back inside, feigning casual interest as Derek handed me another glass of champagne. The bubbles tickled my nose, but the taste was bitter on my tongue. I needed proof, something beyond the text, something tangible. I leaned in toward Alyssa, who was at the bar with her husband, and whispered, "Hey, do you remember Jessica saying she was tied up with work all last month?" She glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," she said softly, but I bumped into her twice at the coffee shop downtown. Wednesdays, Thursdays. She looked like she was meeting someone, though. Her voice dropped. I asked, and she said it was an old client. Seemed off, honestly. My heart hammered. Alyssa's admission confirmed more than I'd dared to hope. I wasn't overreacting. There were witnesses who noticed the same discrepancies I did. I excused myself and wandered toward an unlit hallway that led to the offices where guests stored their belongings. The soft glow of a single lamp revealed rows of filing cabinets. Under the door marked Event Coordinator, I found an unlocked drawer containing payment receipts and deposit slips for Jessica's so-called investment. As I rifled through, I discovered a transfer of nearly $10,000 from my joint account into a shell company, one I'd never heard of. The date matched the night she told me she was at a work retreat. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial theft. My chest tightened as I pocketed a copy of the slip. I couldn't let this lie sit, but exposure required careful planning. I slipped out before anyone noticed and made my way back to the main hall. The upbeat music faded into the background as I rejoined the guests, controlling my breathing so I didn't look guilty. I needed answers directly from Jessica, but confrontation now would blow everything up. Still, the weight of that paper in my pocket felt like a ticking bomb. I found Jessica next to the dessert table, her fingers hovering over a plate of mini eclairs. "Hey," I said, voice low. She turned, proper composure in place. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked, keeping the edge out of my tone. She smiled but didn't answer. I watched her carefully, then leaned in. "It's weird. Remember how you said you were at that retreat for work? I ran into your coordinator earlier. He said you were at a cafe downtown." Her smile flickered. "Work retreats can happen off-site too," she replied smoothly, voice honeyed. "You know how I am about scouting locations." She slid past me, dismissing the inconsistency like brushing away dust. My jaw clenched. She was good at deflection, and I had to be smarter. I drifted toward Jake, spotting him leaning against a pillar near the head table. I slid in beside him. "Nice setup," I said casually. He nodded, eyes avoiding mine. "You two seem really busy lately," I continued. He swallowed hard. "It's just business," he said, deliberately vague. I hid my anger. Every word I didn't say was a weapon I was loading. Funny. I thought business trips were during the week. Not the middle of our anniversary dinner. His face paled for an instant, but he recovered. People do odd hours. He shrugged and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Back at our table, murmurs of gossip already stirred among the other guests. Alyssa gave me a quick, sympathetic look before turning away. The circle felt smaller now. Trust was a currency no one wanted to spend. I could see friends exchanging knowing glances, half-whispered jokes that stung more than any direct insult. Everyone was piecing together something behind Jessica's back. The friend group was quietly fracturing, like cracks forming in a frozen lake. One wrong step and the whole thing could collapse. I caught Jessica's eye from across the room. She gave me a cautious nod, as if daring me to make a move. The message notification pinged on her phone. She checked it, pressing her lips tight. I knew enough to be furious, but not enough to destroy the whole group on the spot. I sipped my champagne, its sweetness clashing with the bitterness in my gut. The betrayal cut deeper with every glance, every half-truth she issued. I slipped away again, this time heading to the bathroom under the guise of freshening up. I stared at myself in the mirror, pale, tense, eyes dark with suspicion. The receipts burned a hole in my pocket, reminding me of how much I stood to lose. I splashed water on my face and took a deep breath, resolving to confront Jessica on my terms. But first, I had to gather the last piece of proof, something that couldn't be deflected with polished words. Back in the hall, I spotted Alyssa near the dance floor. "Need your help?" I whispered urgently. She nodded, following me to a quieter corner. I showed her the receipt. Her eyes widened. I knew she was up to something, but this... She shook her head. "You have to use this. Now." She pressed her hand on my arm and whispered a suggestion for ensuring Jessica couldn't cover her tracks. It was risky, but without it, none of this mattered. I pocketed the receipt and straightened my shoulders as the band struck up a new song. The flickering lights painted moving shadows on the walls, mirroring the shifting loyalties around me. I returned to Jessica's side, offering her a tentative smile. Inside, I was a volcano ready to erupt, but outside, I stayed calm. She met my gaze, and for a split second, her facade cracked. That was all I needed, a glimpse of the real her behind the mask. The room spun with music and laughter, but I felt strangely detached. The betrayal had surfaced, and now the real battle began. Whenever I chose to strike, it would change everything, and there would be no going back. The morning after the wedding felt like waking into a half-remembered nightmare. Sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, but instead of comfort, it brought fresh anxiety. Every interaction from the night before replayed in my head. Jessica's forced laughter, Jake's guilty glances, Alyssa's worried eyes. I dressed in my usual routine, but each step felt mechanical, like I was going through motions in someone else's life. My mind was already racing ahead, planning my next moves. I slipped into the living room where Jessica was scrolling through her phone, her silence more telling than any words. She looked up briefly, offering a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I returned the gesture and retreated to my home office under the guise of checking work emails. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out my recorder. I hit play on the previous night's files. Muffled conversations, flashes of her voice blaming misunderstandings, Jake's low assurances. It wasn't crystal clear yet, but the tone told a story of damage control. Next, I opened my banking app and checked the lines I'd already flagged. The transfers to that shell company were only the beginning. There were smaller withdrawals, 50 here, 75 there, spread out to avoid suspicion. My savings, earmarked for a down payment on a house, had been trickling away. I grabbed a notepad and wrote down every date, every amount, every message snippet linking back to those nights she'd spent working late. With cold precision, I charted their deception. I left the office door ajar and wandered back to the living room. Jessica was on the couch, scrolling through social media. "Long night?" I asked lightly, hiding the recorder behind my back. She glanced up. "Just catching up," she said softly. "Sorry about last night. It was intense." I nodded, sitting beside her. I let her believe I was still reeling, still vulnerable. Better to seem unarmed than to raise alarms. Over the next 2 days, I watched her movements like clockwork. She left for work at the same odd hours I'd noted, Thursday mornings, Sunday afternoons. I followed her once, trailing her to an unmarked building on the edge of town. Inside, I watched her through a cracked window, sharing a laugh with Jake. They looked comfortable together, too comfortable. I snapped a photo through the glass and slipped away before either noticed. The image joined the growing dossier in my folder. Meanwhile, rumors began swirling among friends. Alyssa texted me, cautioning that Jessica was spreading stories, that I was overworked, stressed, paranoid. A small part of me hated that she'd try to isolate me, but the larger part recognized the tactic, misinformation. I had to counter quietly, lest I look like the problem. I posted a photo of Jessica and me laughing at brunch on my private feed. No caption, no explanation. It was neutral but put her in the position of explaining, not me. Within hours, she liked it and wrote good times, deflecting attention back onto our shared history. One evening, I organized a guys' night at my place, ostensibly to blow off steam after wedding festivities. Jake arrived with a six-pack and a smile that didn't match his eyes. We settled around the coffee table, surrounded by board games and snacks. Conversation flowed until I brought up business innocuously. "Have you ever gotten offers that seemed too good to be true?" I asked Jake casually. He laughed. "All the time, man. But you've got to read the fine print." I leaned closer. Funny. Somehow I missed that memo. I waited, letting the question hang. He shifted, denied, then muttered, "It's complicated." I let it drop, pretending to change topics, all the while watching his guilt unravel. Late that night, I searched the web for that shell company. It had no real storefront, no clients, only a P.O. box. I copied every snippet. Press releases with no staff listed. A LinkedIn profile that suddenly disappeared. I printed screenshots, stapled them next to the bank slips. On my wall, all the pieces formed a map of her betrayal. Steps I'd taken to protect us, mortgage pre-approval, house viewings, were now testaments to her lies. My vision blurred with anger and grief. But I forced myself to breathe. This was Michael Corleone territory. I needed strategy, not rage. The next afternoon, I joined Jessica for a working lunch. She smiled, thinking she'd thrown me off. We sat in a quiet corner of the cafe she frequented. I ordered water and watched her stir her latte, forcing sentences. "It's been hectic lately, hasn't it?" She nodded, her voice measured. I pulled out a folder and placed it between us. Her lips parted. "What's that?" I sipped my water. "Just something I've been gathering." I slid the printed receipts, screenshots, and transcripts across the table. Her hand froze over her cup. Coffee sloshed and spilled. She stared at the papers, slowly absorbing each line. I watched her face flush, guilt and fear mingling with tears. Friends and colleagues around us turned heads. She placed her hands over the documents. "Marcus, please," she began, voice trembling. I raised a palm. "I'm not here for excuses." She tried to explain, to claim she was protecting me from something worse. But the lies and the numbers spoke louder. I folded my arms. "There's nothing to protect me from." I stood and walked away, leaving her to face the fallout in public humiliation. It was a calculated strike. That evening, messages flooded my phone. Alyssa checked in, offering support. Derek texted to see if I was okay. Jake's phone was ringing nonstop. I let them ring. I needed space to decide the final push. Do I cut ties completely and walk away with scars as reminders? Do I demand retribution, maybe freeze accounts, involve authorities? Or do I keep control, letting it play out until I choose the final reveal? The choice felt like standing at a crossroads in the dark. I looked at the papers spread across my desk. Evidence of betrayal, lies, and theft. I breathed deeply, awareness settling in. Playing the long game meant patience, restraint, and the advantage of surprise. They thought they'd won. I was already 2 steps ahead. Tomorrow I'd set the next trap. The catch? They'd never know it was mine. And with that thought, I sat back, ready to watch my silent plan unfold. The candlelit patio felt smaller than usual, the warm glow doing nothing to soften the tension that curled through the group like smoke. I lowered my voice as we sat around the wrought iron table, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and the distant hum of crickets. Derek hovered behind us, arms crossed. His jaw clenched as if he were deciding which side to back. Jake's laughter had the wrong edges, too sharp, too forced, and Jessica's eyes darted between us, calculating. In that moment, I understood the battlefield had shifted. Friends were no longer allies, and trust had a price. I stood abruptly, knocking my chair back with a scrape that cut through the silence. "Jake," I said, voice low but fierce. He looked up, surprise flickering before it hardened into defensiveness. "We need to talk. Just the two of us." He nodded, shoulders stiff, and followed me around to the other side of the patio. Once out of earshot, I seized his arm. "Why?" I demanded. "Why betray me like this?" His face darkened. "You don't get it, Marcus. It wasn't just her idea." His words tumbled out. His resentment at always being second, his jealousy of my stability, the whisper campaign he'd started to undermine me. I matched blow for blow, unleashing years of buried frustration. By the end, his eyes were red, and mine burned with the realization that this friendship had never been equal. When I returned to the table, I found Jessica leaning in close to Alyssa, her voice honeyed and urgent. I caught snippets. "He's losing it," she whispered, placing a comforting hand on Alyssa's arm. "You know, Marcus, he blows things out of proportion. Stay calm. I'll handle it." Alyssa's expression flickered between doubt and sympathy. Jessica was weaving a web, bending loyalties with words and half-truths. It was clear she wanted me isolated, painted as unstable, so no one would listen when I spoke the full truth. Alyssa stood abruptly, gathering her purse. I braced myself for her verdict. Instead, she turned to Jessica, her voice firm. "I need air," she murmured and walked away. The look she shot me over her shoulder was unsteady, but it carried a promise. She wasn't on Jessica's side completely. My throat tightened. She was wavering, and that shift changed everything. Derek rejoined us, folding his arms as if weighing the cost of every word. His loyalty to Jake and family ties pulled him one way, but his respect for me pulled him another. He cleared his throat. "Marcus, maybe you should let this rest," he said, voice even. "It's not worth losing everyone over." The sting of betrayal crashed through me again. Losing them was exactly what I'd been preparing for. "No," I replied, voice steady. "This ends now." I laid my evidence on the table, photos of Jessica and Jake, bank slips, message logs. Each document landed like a verdict. Gasps circled the table. Jessica's face paled, lips parting in shock. Jake's jaw dropped. Alyssa stopped mid-step, her arm halfway into the air. Derek's jaw clenched, pain and loyalty warring in his eyes. The group's hush felt like an earthquake. Alliances shattered in real time. I met each gaze. "You all deserve to know who you've trusted," I said. "I'm done hiding. You can choose where you stand." For a moment, the only sound was the night breeze. Then Alyssa stepped forward, gently placing her hand on mine. "I believe you," she said softly. That small act crystallized the sides. She with me, Derek hesitating, Jake and Jessica reeling. The lines were drawn, irrevocably, in betrayal and truth. As I gathered my things, the weight of what I'd done settled in. I'd risked everything. Friendships, reputation, my own heart, to stand firm. Some would call me vindictive. Others would say I was justified. But in that moment I felt neither. I felt free. I turned the war into daylight, and every secret, every lie had to live or die in the open now. The guests' muffled chatter inside the house seemed distant, as if I were on a different plane. The war had moved off the battlefield of my mind and onto the table between friends. Tomorrow, the fallout would spread beyond this patio. But tonight, the lines were clear. I would no longer be the pawn in their game. I would be the one writing the final moves. The weekend gathering had been billed as a casual barbecue at Alyssa's new house. A low-key reunion for our tight-knit group. The sun glared bright overhead, and kids ran through sprinklers while adults clustered around picnic tables. It should have been the perfect cover for the truth to surface, and that timing was deliberate. As Marcus, I arrived with quiet resolve, my evidence folder tucked under my arm, ready for the final act. I stepped into the backyard, where half the group lounged in folding chairs and others manned the grill. Jessica greeted me with a nervous wave, her polite smile faltering when she saw the look in my eyes. Jake hovered near the drinks cooler, avoiding eye contact. I walked past Derek, who gave me a small nod, the only sign he was still on my side. Taking a deep breath, I called out, "Hey, everyone, Can I have your attention for a minute? The chatter stuttered to a halt. Conversations died, and all eyes turned toward me. The laughter ceased. Even the kids paused. I opened the folder and placed it on a nearby folding table. I know this isn't what anyone expected for a barbecue, I began, voice carrying over the hush. I looked at Jessica, whose expression turned from fear to desperation. But some truths can't wait any longer. I laid out the printed bank slips, photo evidence, and transcribed messages. I spoke clearly, recounting how Jessica and Jake had met in secret for months, how they siphoned my savings into a shell company, and how they twisted our friends into silence. Every detail was precise: dates, amounts, conversations. I watched as the sun danced across the glossy photos, shining light on their betrayals in the most literal sense. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alyssa covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Derek stared at the papers, jaw tight with conflict. Jessica's hand flew to her chest. Jake's face drained of color. Friends murmured in disbelief as I closed the folder. I trusted you all, I said quietly. But trust is earned, and once broken, it changes everything. Some friends turned away, unable to meet my gaze. Others leaned in, their expressions hardening as they processed the scope of the deception. A few, like Carl, our mutual friend from college, stepped forward. Marcus, I'm so sorry you went through this, he said, voice low. I had no idea. He placed a hand on my shoulder. That gesture cut through the betrayal like a bomb and reminded me not everyone was complicit. Jessica's shoulders shook as she tried to speak. Marcus, please, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But the words trailed off. No one moved to comfort her. The betrayal had isolated her completely. Jake cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said awkwardly, glancing at the ground. I never meant for it to hurt you like this. His apology felt hollow against the evidence. Derek folded his arms. I've known Jake and Jessica for years, he said, voice strained. But I can't defend what they did. Marcus, I'm with you. That declaration shifted the balance. Others followed. Friends I thought lost to loyalty turned back. The backyard, once a place of laughter, now felt like a courtroom where verdicts were rendered with looks and whispered counsel. Jessica and Jake attempted to regroup. Jessica's voice sharpened. You're making a scene, she accused, gesturing to the stunned onlookers. This could have been handled privately. But Derek interjected. You and Jake chose to handle it by stealing from Marcus and lying to all of us. This is public now, and you'll face the consequences. Their scramble to contain the damage was frantic. Texts, phone calls, whispered strategies. But isolation tightened like a noose. No one would answer their calls. No one would look past the betrayal. Amid the fallout, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. I had exposed them, but at the cost of friendships I once cherished. I collected my folder and turned to leave. Alyssa stepped beside me. Do you need anything? She asked softly. I shook my head, voice thick. Just some space. She nodded, tears glistening. You'll always have my back. That loyalty stung with gratitude and loss. I walked through the crowd, each person avoiding or offering tentative sympathy. I accepted a water bottle from Carl, mumbled thanks, and headed for my car. In the driveway, I paused and looked back at the yard. The scene felt surreal. Laughter had returned as people refocused on the barbecue, but the undercurrent was forever shifted. The drive home was quiet. I let the evidence folder rest on the passenger seat, its weight a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. The betrayal left scars, but it also cleared the fog of doubt that had followed me for weeks. In that clarity, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. What would you have done if your best friend and partner pulled this off behind your back? Would you go nuclear like Marcus? Or just walk away? Drop your take in the comments. I read all of them. And hey, if you liked the story, hit the subscribe button for more stories.